Let's do a quick recap of this story and how we arrived at yesterday's verdict.
So on the 12th of January 2022, at around 3:30 p.m, Ashling Murphy was killed as she was exercising along the Grand Canal in Tullamore. She was stabbed in the neck a brutal 11 times. And, you know, she was come across by various different people that came across the attack, who reported it to Gardaí, who then came on scene. Joseph Puska was eventually arrested in connection with the murder and charged, and he appeared in court. Trial began about 4 weeks ago, and throughout the trial, you know, we heard various different pieces of evidence. He eventually went on the stand and told his version of events. Yesterday, the jury came back after just over almost 2.5 hours of deliberations and gave their guilty verdict.
Yeah, when we look at his kind of flip-flopping of his evidence, I mean, initially he confessed in hospital. The trial heard that he was under medication. He kind of recanted that. Then the evidence was overwhelmingly in favour of his guilt. But I mean, covering it on a day-to-day basis, harrowing for anybody listening to that, especially the family.
Absolutely heartbreaking for the family to hear all that. I think it's especially difficult for them to have to hear that post-mortem evidence. Hearing about Ashling Murphy being stabbed in the neck 11 times, hearing about the injuries to her voice box, hearing about the injuries to the vessels around her neck, which would have meant that she wasn't able to make any audible sounds, was quite heartbreaking for journalists and for everyone else in the gallery to hear. I can't even imagine actually how it would have felt for the family.
Yeah, massively painful. The lies and the changing of the stories, like him giving his account of what he claims happened, that had to be harrowing as well.
Yeah, I mean, it was quite brazen of him to get up on the stand to begin with. I think in trials like this, you don't usually see, you know, a murder suspect on the stand telling their version of events. It is unusual. But for him to get up there and try and claw back, you know, some semblance of claiming the story was very harrowing and heartbreaking for the family to hear. I mean, he had a lot of sympathies. We heard from when he was speaking to Gardaí in hospital, he had a lot of sympathy for his own family and was afraid for them, and the fact that he could apply that to his own family but not to Ashling Murphy's family, and to put them through a trial and not have the decency to plead guilty was quite something.
Exactly, and of course we heard yesterday after the verdict from her family as well, and it was quite devastating for them. I mean,
Absolutely.
Devastating. But very strong of them to speak out afterwards, I felt.
Absolutely. I actually wasn't expecting them to speak out outside the court to give a statement, because it has been such a high-profile trial in the media. It's been quite heartbreaking for them to be sitting in such a public forum, to have to go through this in such a public arena. I can only imagine how sad that is and how strong they'd have to be to get through all that.
The jury went out for like a very short time.
Yeah.
And came back with a unanimous verdict.
Yeah.
So the changes to the story, the story that he gave 2 days after the murder when he was arrested, compared to the story that he was trotting out in court, the jury didn't buy it.
They didn't buy it, no. I mean, the evidence was overwhelming against him. The stories, the lies that he told, nobody bought it. Even the judge at the end says to the jury, "I'm glad you're not going to waste any more of your valuable time on Mr. Puska's nonsense." The stories, like, it was something that he made up. And I suppose the defence, the judge did say of the defence, you know, it wasn't down to Michael Bowman, senior counsel. It wasn't farcical that, you know, he wasn't blaming them. It is up to the defendant to direct their counsel. And he said that it was no kind of reflection on those, that it was just Joseph Puska and his nonsense.
From witnessing all 4 weeks of the trial, what witnesses kind of really hit you in the heart? Because there was a couple of women as well who, there but for the grace of God, you know, they've narrow escapes by all accounts. Yeah,
those two women at the very beginning, they came along and they witnessed some of the attack. They came across Joseph Puska and Ashling Murphy in the ditch. And I think their account on the stand of the fear that they felt for Ashling, but also for themselves. Now, obviously, this wasn't a sexual offence. However, they had initially feared that that's what was happening, so they ran to 2 men to get some help. And they asked those men to call Gardaí. They explained what they'd seen, and those men they both said that they had taken it in their stride. They weren't really taking them seriously, so they ran off to knock on doors to try and get somebody to ring the guards. And those 2 men, when they went on the stand, one of them said that if that's what was happening, they believed that, you know, whatever happens between a couple happens between a couple. And then the other one just said that they were over exaggerating. And that comparison to me of the fear of the women and the fear of the men is unparalleled.
I think the words of Women's Aid as well yesterday after the verdict, saying it's a shocking example of the dangers women face. And when this happened as well, I think that was a huge outcry against that. Like, I don't think, Martin, you would ever, like when I went to college first, the first thing I was told, put your keys in your hands when you're walking down, if you're crossing the street. I mean, men don't get the same warnings we have. They don't understand the same fear we have. And that actually solidified the utter terror that goes through any woman if they're walking and hear footsteps behind them or see somebody that they don't know across from them. And that can be in broad daylight, as we saw there.
Yeah, I mean, these things are really rare to happen. Normally, a lot of murders or homicides they happen behind closed doors. It's domestic. It normally happens in the home.
It's a partner.
It's women.
Yeah.
But when something like this happens, when you think that you're safe, you're just going about your own business, it does bring this kind of public outcry, and it instills fear in women. I mean, I remember at the time, myself, my friends, everyone around me, we were all extra vigilant. I remember walking around at the time at night, going to the gym, and men would they'd swerve to try and, you know, there was a huge heightened awareness of what was going on. But also, I think it's important to say that, like, something like this that does happen, it's unfortunate that Ashling Murphy would become kind of the poster child for violence against women. She didn't want that. Her family didn't want that. But also the fact that women are told how to behave and how to prevent this from happening, instead of men being told, don't go out and murder somebody.
Yeah. And that's it. And that's, I think, because ahead of this as well, I mean, the whole thing for any assault against women is like, you be safe. You don't go out late at night time. You don't wear inappropriate clothing. You make sure you're in a well-lit area. It's always put on the woman to be safe and not... And Ashling did everything right. Every single thing we've all been told in our entire lives as women to do to keep safe, going down about your business on broad daylight. She did everything, and that just illustrated it even more, which is even more shocking. I know this is an awful thing to even think about, but do you think her case has in any way changed the psyche of the Irish people in relation to the way women are treated and men are talked to about women in the way they should be treated?
I actually don't think so. I think at the time there was this kind of public outcry and there was kind of that awareness. But going on now, following on now, I mean, I don't think there's been much change. We're still seeing cases of domestic violence, sexual violence. The conversation has to change. It has to be, the conversation now needs to go from women, you're doing what you can, you're told to do X, Y, and Z, but the conversation has to change, and, you know, men need to be taught, don't go out and murder people. They need to be taught consent in school, and it needs to go back into that kind of early sort of, you know, topics of misogyny against women. It doesn't just begin, you know, at murder.
Awful, it starts violence like that. It starts at the little.
It starts at the little things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just ask you, what was the atmosphere like in the court yesterday when that guilty verdict was read out?
There was very high emotions from everyone. When the guilty verdict was read out, Ashling Murphy's family had a beautiful framed photograph of her that they held up. And they held it up again as the jury were leaving. And as the jury were leaving, they seen this photograph of Ashling, and a round of applause from everyone in the courtroom. And I seen one woman as she was leaving on the jury who was trying to hold back the tears. It was quite upsetting. I mean, the whole family, there was tears of joy. They were relieved that they had finally had their man.
And of course, we need to, give our deepest sympathies to Ashling's family. I know it must have been absolutely terrible for them to have to go through that over the last number of weeks. And of course, sentencing as well would be 17th of November, isn't it?
17th of November.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. Now, if you've been affected by anything we spoke about, you can get support and information from womensaid.ie.